So first we will start with a prayer, and then I'll announce what we are going to talk today, and then I will hand over this one to Anil or Piyush, who will explain about the test and all that. Who's going to do that?
I will explain, ma'am.
Okay, so then I will invite you. You give a brief of how the session is going to happen, and then I will start with my presentation. Okay.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति
Okay. Namaste to everyone. A very good evening to all of you. So thanks for being with us since the last 4 days, the 5th day of the workshop, and the last day of the workshop is today. So again, just to kind of recap, the first day of the workshop, we heard about the expansive significance of Indian traditional knowledge. The second day, you had a general overview of all the intellectual property types with examples. The third day, we talked about the protection of traditional knowledge. We introduced to you the concepts of defensive protection as well as the positive protection. Yesterday, you had a very exciting talk about what should be the way we should handle and work with traditional knowledge, especially considering that oral traditional knowledge is part of people's livelihoods. We talked about the ethics that needs to be observed while we handle traditional knowledge. Today, we will be having a very brief session where I'll be talking to you about, how traditional knowledge can inspire you towards greater innovations. We'll take up 2 or 3 case studies, and then followed by the exam, the test that we talked about, so that all of you would be able to get the certificates of participating in this workshop. So before I go ahead with my presentation, I would like to invite my colleague Anil Kumar to give you a brief about how this session is going to happen today. Anil? Unmute. Anil, we are not able to hear you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all the participants. Today we are going to have the lecture first, which we'll have for 20 minutes. Then we'll have the assessment. And this assessment will be consisting of multiple choice questions. So we have 20 questions that are to be answered in 30 minutes. So first we'll have the lecture, ma'am. Then we'll talk about the assessment, and we'll share the link also.
Yeah, so you explain how the link is going to be given.
Yeah, we'll share this link in the chat box. So all the participants who have registered and who are attending through WebEx, they will be given the link to answer the questions, and we'll stop the live streaming on YouTube during that session.
Thank you so much. So Piyush, shall I get started with my presentation? So thank you once again for all your active participation. We really feel very, motivated that we have many people, like-minded people who would like to be inspired by our own traditional knowledge. So today, as I mentioned, this is going to be the 5th day of the workshop. Okay, the next session will begin on the 21st to 25th of 2023. If in case you feel that you have learned something and are inspired by this workshop, please ask your colleagues to also join us in the second batch, which is on the 21st. So as I mentioned, the workshop today would be talking about TK-inspired innovations, the potential and the road ahead. And this will be for a very brief 20 minutes. We can have a question answer session for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then you will be given a link to the workshop closure, the assessment. you can participate in that, and we will close the live streaming of that thereafter. So today, as I said, we will be talking about the TK-inspired innovations, the potential and the road ahead. The reason why I thought it is very important for this workshop, because all the while we have been talking about traditional knowledge, and then we had been talking about intellectual property rights and people's rights and all that. But why is it important to understand all this? The reason being, our traditions and culture, they have a very, very important contribution to the achieving of the sustainable development goals. In fact, the United Cities and Local Governments, the UCLG report talks about culture in sustainable development goals, and they have even given an example from each of the countries as to how each of our sustainable development goal can be handled in the context of our own traditions and culture. The reason I thought, I would talk about all this in the context of even other nations is to kind of give you a broader overview of how traditional knowledge is not relevant only for India, but also for all the other countries as well. So talking about the Sustainable Development Goal 1, which is on ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, we have an example from Pekalongan, Indonesia. This particular city is also called the city of Batik. So people who are aware of Batik, it is a type of printing on clothes, and it is basically a traditional textile sector. This particular city, the Pekalongan, has been contributing to generating employment for the country, and it is the main economic sector where more than 60% of the employees are women. So this is how it can contribute to goal 1, to ending poverty in all forms. If I talk about goal 2 of the Sustainable Development Goal, which is on ending hunger and achieving food security and improved nutrition and promoting sustainable agriculture, of course, in India we have very many traditional practices. But here I would like to give you an example of the seed swap festival of Seferi Hazar from Turkey, which enables the local producers to maintain traditional low-cost agricultural practices, and also sharing of that, so that there is an increased awareness of the need to preserve sustainable food production and consumption based on our own traditions and culture. If we talk about goal 3, which is ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages, I'd like to give our own example of India, where we have this National Ayush Mission. Sorry for the spelling error in national. Here, the National Ayush Mission has been, implemented across all the states and the union territories, and it is to provide better access to the Ayush services, co-location of Ayush facilities in both the primary health centers as well as the community health centers, and also the district hospitals, where the mainstream is only the allopathic system of medicine. Talking of goal 4, which is for ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning and opportunities for all, I'd like to give you an example from Jeonju, South Korea, where they have this traditional culture city project. Here, what happens is that everybody who is part of the education, okay, has to learn to appreciate the traditional culture, which is integrated in their own education, and it is means for lifelong learning programs as well. So when we are talking of lifelong learning program, not only the children, but adults also understand the importance of traditional buildings, intangible heritage, and other cultural assets. So I thought, with this context, that our own, traditions and culture is very important for our sustainable development goals, which means our traditions will continue to have significance as we move forward. I thought, let me give you an example from sports. There is a famous English saying that says, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," and that's very true. And this, when we are talking of sports, it has been inherent even in India that we have so many traditional ways of games and other related, aspects, where it has become part of everybody's life, be it in villages or even the cities and towns. So I would like to give you an example of chess, because we all love and we have heard about it. It's become an international game that everybody looks forward very eagerly. So in early days, it was called the Palaka, a more of a game board. Then in Atharva Veda, it was talked about as Adidevana, which is more in the context of a dice board. In Ashtapada, I mean sorry, in Ramayana, Brahmachala Sutta and all that, they just been called as the Ashtapada, where you have 8 into 8, 64 blocks, and the game is played that way. Then later on, there is a further variation called the Dasapada, and Dasapada is a 10 into 10 notation. Later on, the same chess, that we call today, known to be came to be known as Chaturanga. Then it became Shatranj. Today, everybody knows it as chess. Okay, and it's not just we Indians feel proud of the chess as art that has originated. World over, it has been recognized that the chess has been associated as an Indian invention, and it not only has context of being a game, but about the mathematical notations that are included in that. So it is more of a mental game that provides for intellectual abilities as well. Of course, over the time, it has become, as I said, an international game. There's greater recognition, and right now, we stand India stands fifth in the among the global positioning. And Vishwanathan Anand, a very famous chess player, is ranked ninth in the world. So the reason why I thought I would choose chess as an example, and especially in the context of sustainable development goals, is something that has come from UN itself. Every year on July 20th, we celebrate this day as the World Chess Day. This is to mark the date of establishment of the International Chess Federation in Paris in 1924. The International or the World Chess Day has been celebrated since 1996 itself. And here, what is really extremely remarkable is that 70% of all adult population, has played chess at some point or the other in their lives, and close to about 600 million adults play chess regularly. And the UN has also observed that mathematically there are more possible games of chess than there are atoms in an observable universe. So that's the kind of iteration that one can look at in terms of coming up with newer forms of chess. And it is also very remarkable that we always talk of checkmate. This checkmate can happen in just two moves, and you need not play a very lengthy game. In just two moves, it will be done. And the oldest living grandmaster is Yuri Everbach from Russia, who celebrated his 100th birthday in 2022. The reason why I'm saying is that, a chess, which we all believe is more like a sport, it has been recognized as something that can contribute to a sustainable development goal, because it also promotes tolerance and understanding among peoples and nations. To just report what the UN has said, chess also offers important opportunities in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, including strengthening education, realizing gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, and fostering inclusion, tolerance, mutual understanding, and respect. So you can understand how India contributed to something which has international recognition today. The second case study that I thought I will, bring it to your purview is about how traditional knowledge has been used for health. And very often, when we are talking of traditional knowledge, the first thing that comes is about, medicines, traditional medicines. I'd like to give you an example of quinine for malaria. So, as all of you might know, malaria is a mosquito-borne disease, and it is, a really fatal disease in the olden times, and even now, especially in the African regions. It is believed that between 150 to 300 million of people were killed in the 20th century, and almost 50% of the world population still live in areas where there is high transmission of the malarial disease. In Italian, malaria is called the bad air. So earlier times, because they did not have any cure, they would do bloodletting by cutting or limb amputations to almost like making a hole in the skull. So they thought these were the treatments for malaria. So the legend, the traditional knowledge associated with this entire quinine story is that it appears that an Andean Indian, that is in the country of Chile, who had high fever at some particular point of time, was going through a forest area. Out of thirst, he drank water from a stagnant pool there, and he found that the water was very bitter. He got very scared, thinking that he got poisoned with the stagnant water, and but then and started sweating a lot. He realized that he started feeling that he was going to die. But then what happened in some time is that his fever came down, okay, and this led to the recognition of this cinchona tree for malaria, which where the and the bioactive component is quinine. There's another story also associated with quinine. In 1631, I believe the Countess of Chincona, who was the wife of the Viceroy of Peru, was down with malaria. And this is more of intermittent fevers, okay? And the Jesuit priest in that region made a concoction from the bark of the Andean tree and mixed it with clove and rose leaf syrups and other dried plants, and she recovered from this intermittent fever, which we now know as malaria. So, having faith with this particular cure, only after about almost like two centuries, in 1820, quinine was extracted from the bark of this particular plant called the cinchona, now named after the Countess of Chincona, and by the two French scientists, Pierre Joseph Pelletier and Joseph Caveto. And purified quinine then replaced the extract of the bark of the plant for standard treatment of malaria. This was used by the Dutch in Indonesia, French in Algeria, by the British in India, Jamaica, and across all the Southeast Asia and West Africa, especially during the colonial period. In fact, it is believed that, just for about 25 years, the British government during the colonial period spent almost close to 6.5 million pounds importing the cinchona bark for its colonial troops. Only in the year 1944, that is, you imagine, I do not know when the Andean Indian had the treatment given, but in 1631, even if you go by the records, it was only after almost like 300 years the synthetic quinine was made, and the synthetic quinine had better improved properties because it had fewer side effects than the natural variety. But the overuse of quinine led to the resistant malaria. So the story of artemisinin now comes into picture. So this is again, as many of you know, because artemisinin has been associated with the Nobel Prize, there is traditional knowledge associated with it. Having, during the World War II, there was a lot of use of quinine, which led to the quinine-resistant malaria. And during this time, the North Vietnam asked the help of China to battling this disease because there were a lot of casualties during the war. So then the former president of China himself launched the Project 523 based on the date when it was, the project was approved to find a cure for chloroquine-resistant malaria. So then what happened was that, I like to tell you about the story of Su Yu, who is the Nobel Prize winner for this Artemisinin for philosophy and medicine. And she actually, studied pharmacology at the Beijing Medical College. She learned to classify medicinal plants, extract ingredients, and determine the chemical structures. And she was also trained in traditional Chinese medicine between 59 and 62 to kind of train researchers with in modern medicine, modern science. In 1969, she was, given assigned as the head of this project, which the president of China, former president of China, launched. And for this, she had to go to the particular island where there was, highly rampant malaria. And she returned to Beijing. By that time, almost close to 2.5 lakh compounds were tested for anti-malaria property, and nothing worked. So she went back to her Asian text to understand how can we treat, how was the traditional Chinese medicine used for malaria. Of course, people might not have heard of the word malaria at those times, but you always had intermittent fevers. So in the book, she identified that Artemisia annova, that is a sweet wormwood, was used in 400 AD for intermittent fevers. So she took up this particular wormwood. She isolated one active compound, and which seemed to be effective on the parasite. But when she tested the extract, she found it was ineffective. So she went back to the ancient text. Then she realized that perhaps, by overboiling, she might have been losing the active ingredient. So she used an ether-based solvent to extract the bioactive component. And this particular extract was very effective in both mice and monkeys, but then it was very difficult to do clinical trials at that time. So she herself, along with two of her colleagues, tested the medicine upon themselves and found, and then tested on 21 more patients, and all of them recovered from malaria. So this is a story of how traditional knowledge could contribute to something which was really useful and which is still very useful. So in 1972, the Artemisinin was distilled and the findings were shared in Chinese. Only after 5 years or 7 years, the work was published in English. Once the WHO got to know of it, they made presentations in 1981. Only in 2006, after almost like 3 decades, the first line, it was artemisinin was recommended as the first line treatment for malaria. And in 2015, she won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. This is just to say that it is not easy for somebody to identify something and get recognition for the activity, but time and patience pays, and traditional knowledge inspires even the Nobel Prize. But another very different example, so far that I had given you one example, is about how a codified text inspired something new and innovative. I'd like to give you one example here about how oral traditional knowledge inspired, artificial glaciers. So this is a story of growing glaciers. This is known as oral traditional knowledge in the mountain communities of the Hindu Kush range. And especially this was the time when, who is Genghis Khan was coming into the Indian region to take control of the Indian the geographical locations. But then the locals there, they realized that it is going to be a disaster. So they grew artificial glaciers to stop the Genghis Khan and their army to come into the Indian region. There is one another story also associated with it, that during this similar time, many of those the Mongolians came into the Indian region and they killed all the local communities rampantly. So many the widows and the children were left to tend to themselves. So the story goes that there was one lady who felt extremely dejected of life because she lost her husband because of all this, and appears she had gone to a higher altitude, and generally the mountain people communities, they carry water in a bottle guard. Okay, and guards are used as a compartment for storing water also. So out of her dejection that she has lost all her people as well as her husband, it appears that she, out of sheer disappointment and depression, she threw the water, the guard with water in it, on a piece of ice there. And it appears that over time it grew into such a huge glacier that it stopped the army on the other side to come into the region. So this is all oral, stories, the folk tales that goes with the building of artificial glaciers. Life doesn't stop there because some of the communities still practice this. It's of course a tedious and prolonged process, but there's a lot of care that is taken to building artificial glaciers. In fact, it is known even in our Ladakh region, even these days. Of course, the more recent, people say that they only saw their elders perform it, but they have not seen anything since. So here, the way the artificial glaciers are built is that first they identify the site. They make sure that it doesn't go beyond the range of vegetation. It does not face the sun, and also does not have loose sediments and shale, so that it is washed away when there is, the water melting, the ice melting. So here they pay a lot of attention to how they collect the material. So here the story again goes that, they identify two river ranges and identify the glacier, the ice pieces from what is called the masculine glacier and the feminine glacier. It is called Posho and Mosho, Po for the masculine and Mo for the feminine. They collect the glaciers, put it together. They add dry hay, pine needles, saltish soil, guard, cloth and twigs also, and also kafur to take the smell out, charcoal, and large quantities of the compressed snow. And they pay a lot of attention of, the rock cover, altitude, and also the site should also have an in situ ice component there. So this is what forms the component of how the man-made glaciers are made. In fact, the villagers also believe that, women cannot bring the ice from these two rivers. And the river, as I said, the feminine glacier is associated with black color, whereas the masculine glacier is associated with white color. Whoever is bringing, the men who are bringing, they have to walk almost like 30 kilometers or something, carrying those bags, the kiltas that Vijay Lakshmi mentioned a few days ago. And the kiltas are never to be put down. So this is a story, that goes with, forming the artificial glaciers. Why are these artificial glaciers important in today's context? Because if you look at the Leh Ladakh region, there is a huge water deficit during April to June. This is almost like our summer months, and that is also the very key period for sowing of plantation, the cultivation. So here, what happens is that because of lack of water, they do not have proper cultivation, and this, affects their livelihoods in the region. So thinking about all of this, the first, initiative came from the Iceman of India, Chewang Norphel. He was a civil engineer. Realizing the difficulty of having water during these months in the Ladakh region, he's from Ladakh, by the way. The idea that inspired him was that how can we freeze water into ice sheet? He saw, a pipe with water open, because most of the, Himalayan region, they do that so that the water doesn't burst, okay, because of the freezing. And once, the water comes out, there is a sheet formed, and this is what forms the ice there. So what happens is that he thought, okay, let us, think about it. How do we get water from the high altitude into the lower regions? By melting water from the glaciers. So he brought, thought about this particular structure where he would, have these distribution channels. So there is a mainstream, there is a loosely built distribution channel, and then this is made layered so that you are actually storing ice. This is called the artificial glacier at different parts of the mid to higher altitude. And this particular artificial glacier can then provide water during the summer when the water melts. And this water can be used for irrigation purposes. So using this, he had been able to build artificial glaciers at the altitude of 30,000 feet, and almost like 15 glaciers were built to meet the requirements of water in the Ladakh region. Okay, and the smallest was 500 feet, whereas the longest was 2 kilometer long artificial glacier. Taking inspiration from this are the ice stupas by Sonam Wangchuk. And Sonam Wangchuk, what he did is that he created the ice stupa in 2013, again in Ladakh. And this, he wanted to make sure that whatever he is innovating is also suitable for a little lower altitude. And here the ice stupa has an advantage because it can grow up to 10-story building, and the ice stupa will start melting in March, so that, the water can be made available up to July, which is a crucial period for the plantation. This particular ice stupa has, has has given so much of interest, has been given such global interest, that even countries by Switzerland, Chile, and others are making use of this ice stupa idea to build artificial glaciers even in their countries. The concept is very simple. From a higher altitude, you have a tubing that brings the ice to a lower level. Okay, and then what you do is that you have galvanized iron piping that carries water from the base of the stupa as a sprinkler system. So this is the structure too that is there. So the pipe comes up, then there is water that is coming out of the pipe. Okay, and the outer structure is all made of straw largely. The sprayed water collects and freezes when it is coming down. Okay, and as the ice accumulates, more piping can be added to increase the height of the ice stupa. And so far, a 50-foot ice stupa has been constructed in less than a month, and it stores about 250,000 gallons of water. The ice stupas are often constructed on the top of stream beds, augmenting communal water supply. And from the ice stupas, water can be collected in reservoirs or tanks, or even directly connected to drip irrigation systems. I'd like to show a small video that is very. Yeah, so I'll come to close of the talk. So this is to kind of give an example how codified traditional knowledge has inspired us to bring out something new, drugs, even chess as a game, and even oral traditional knowledge. I suppose is a living example as how you can come with completely very innovative and creative idea based on again traditional knowledge, and that is what forms the foundation of the national IPR policy and the national education policy that I have already talked about. We would need everybody to come together to ensure and also work on our traditional knowledge so that it becomes of use to everybody. So I'd like to touch upon this Sanskrit shloka that says na choraharyam na rajaharyam na bratavajam na आचाबारकारी व्यये कृते वर्धते एव नित्यं विद्याधनं सर्वधनप्रधानम्. So it says the wealth of knowledge is indeed the supreme among all. It cannot be stolen by thief, it cannot be snatched by the king, nor is it divisible among the brothers, nor is it is a burden. It's spent well, it always increases. I think traditional knowledge, not only of India but world over, can be put to good use. And I would require all your participation in the IKS program to make this a reality. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we'll just take a couple of questions, Piyush.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I don't think there is any question here in the chat box. Are there any hands raised? No, I don't see any hands raised. So I think we can stop here. Uh, Piyush? There are no questions, Piyush.
I don't see any hand. Yeah. Okay,
So
let
maybe
me pick up question from the chat box, please.
I don't see anything.
Okay.
All right, then what I will do is that I will hand over the platform to Vijay. She will have the concluding remarks. Okay, and then you can, put the link and also conclude with a prayer. We can stop here. Vijay?
Thank you very much. So we will move forward to the final leg of this workshop, that is the assessment for the registered participants. But before that, we would like to conclude the workshop for all the audience who have joined us here through the YouTube live streaming. First of all, we would like to thank the Indian Knowledge Systems Division for providing us this opportunity and platform to share information on topics which are very dear to us: traditional knowledge, intellectual property, people's rights. So we have been able to share whatever we could, and I'm sure that through this interaction, you people may have learned a lot of things, and I'm sure you spread the word, and this would come back to us with more information later on. We hope to be enriched by this interaction. We also wish to thank all of you who have been present here, most supportive, most attentive during the past 5 days. Thank you so much for making these sessions so lively and interactive. And with this, we would like to conclude the live streaming. Piyushji, all the registered participants are requested to please stay connected for the assessment. That is a test that Dr. Vishwajanani spoke about. And now I hand over the platform to Piyushji and Anandji. You can take it over from here. Thank you so much.
Piyushji, we can stop live streaming on YouTube now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, as we